Hi, you guys, and welcome to week 3 of rhetoric. This presentation will focus on introducing pathos, the appeal to emotion. If you remember back to the first week when we talked about the 3 things that an argument must do to be persuasive, last week we talked about logos, the idea that an argument must make sense. The second thing is that it must be a subject that the audience cares about. So pathos is the way in which a speaker attempts to do that, to create that emotional relationship between the subject or the message and the audience. So pathos is the appeal to emotion. And what's important to understand about pathos, I think we often see fear and guilt and those sorts of things, but when it's attempting to evoke an emotional response in the audience, the speaker can try to evoke positive feelings like joy, relief, sense of belonging or attractiveness, or negative feelings, guilt, fear, sadness, etc. So if we look at the couple of examples that I have for you, right? If we're looking at the tire one, the Michelin, the claim that so much is riding on your tires, that's appealing to our need to protect our children. You could also say that it's appealing to the fear that something could happen to your child, but it's that protective instinct, right, of the people that we care about. That is the emotional appeal there. We're talking about Otis. That's definitely pulling on our heartstrings a little bit, our love for animals and the sadness that he might be experiencing, food that's not good for him, right? So again, that appeals to our need to kind of care for our loved ones. And then that final one, Coca-Cola, the emotion that it's appealing to is this idea of happiness, bright, cheery colors, and this idea, open a Coke, open happiness. So, like I said, when we're thinking about pathos and where it fits on the rhetorical triangle, because we always go back to that, it's situated in there with the audience. It's how we connect the audience to the message, how we make them care about it. In images and advertisements, it's done through lots of the imaging. In writing, it's most often done through personal stories, emotionally charged language, and figurative language. We're going to break down each one of those individually. But if you looked at the learning targets for this week, there are some new vocabulary words. Those vocabulary words are here: anecdote and connotation. And so make sure that you are making some notes or paying attention when we get back into those two. Okay, so the first one, you guys, is using anecdotes. What an anecdote is a personal story. So it's a short little story that helps to connect the audience to the subject in more of a kind of personal or human way. So it's using personal examples of things that you've experienced or telling a story about someone else's experience. And some examples of that are on this slide, and I will review them in just a second. But when I think about, if we were trying to if I was trying to persuade you to be more active in fighting against human trafficking, I could give you lots of statistics and lists of facts about the human trafficking numbers and ages and those sorts of things. But if I told you a story about a girl who was trafficked, to supplement the use of facts and statistics, it makes it more real for people. And when it feels more real and people are more connected to the subject, and they are more easily persuaded than by just looking at a graph or a chart. It's that need to feel connected to the issue at hand that makes anecdotes one of the most powerful rhetorical choices that a speaker can make. So I like to break it down into a couple of different ways that anecdotes can be used based on the purpose of the particular speech. So if anecdotes are being used to caution or warn people, right, to invoke that sense of fear, at the beginning of a speech about fire safety, the speaker may tell a short tale about a serious injury that occurred as a result of not following protocol. right? So why should we do this? Well, let me tell you a story about how I got hurt when I didn't follow these protocols. Or maybe before beginning a lecture on why staying out late is inappropriate, a father may tell his daughter about a scary incident he had one time when he stayed out too late, or even a story about the neighbor's kid or a girl in high school when he was a kid, right? Or before giving a presentation on the dangers of drug abuse, the speaker may tell the audience about how he used to use drugs and explains the effects that it had on him and his life and his family. So those are ways that we can use our own personal stories or the stories of people that are close by us to caution people or to kind of set them up to care about our topic. Why should you listen to me? Personal stories and anecdotes are often used also in inspirational or motivational sorts of stories. Right? So, an animal rescue team may tell a story to an audience about the successful rehoming situations that they have had over the years. Right? If I tell you about all of these really happy moments that my nonprofit organization has cultivated, you may be more likely to support my nonprofit instead of somebody else's. Or before beginning a tutoring session, a tutor may tell a student how he used to struggle with the subject matter too, and how he's managed to grow past those difficulties. That helps him to make that kind of human connection to the material and to the student that he's working with. A third example could be when a church youth group leader tells a story about their own conversion and their own kind of experiences with religion to the teenagers in the group. Right. So a personal story is called an anecdote. That's the rhetorical name for it, and it's really just telling a short story in order to make a connection between the audience and the subject of the argument itself. A second strategy is the use of emotionally charged language, right? So some words carry with them the weight of lots of emotion. There are some words in the English language that are a little bit more neutral, but there are lots of words that pack a big bang. I think that was a mixed metaphor there. I think it's supposed to be like pack a big punch or make a big bang. And so the words that speakers use to describe things or to name groups of people uh, can be emotionally charged. The two articles that you're reading this week, one of them starts with something like the damage is everywhere. That word damage is an emotionally charged word. When we call things wars and attacks and those sorts of things, that is emotionally charged, right? So when we talk about emotionally charged language, we talk about a concept called connotation. So when we're talking about defining words, there's a difference between denotation and connotation. Denotation is the dictionary definition of a word, but the connotation, which is one of our vocabulary words for this week, is the idea or the feeling that a word invokes. It still takes into consideration its literal meaning, but it really focuses in on the kind of the emotional weight that a word may carry. So some examples of this, you guys, if we think about the difference between house and home, both of these words refer to a building where people live, but home has a stronger connotation because it brings with it the idea of family and pets, maybe a place of your own. It's just a word that carries more emotion than the word house does. Or we think about the difference between a person walking into a room and sneaking into a room or strutting into a room. All three of these describe a person entering a room, but the first one feels really neutral. The second one implies that somebody has done something wrong. I imagine that they're home late or they don't want to get caught, like something is amiss. That final one, strutting into a room, is a person who is really confident and kind of showing off, right? So the connotation of those words changes, even though they're ultimately talking about the same thing. And then finally, I want you to think about the difference between refugee, asylum seeker, and illegal alien. These are terms that are used in immigration debates regularly. And if we think about a refugee versus an asylum seeker versus an illegal alien, all three of these could refer to the exact same person, but the connotation that they carry is very different. Also, the use of figurative language helps to establish pathos. Sorry, I know you guys can probably hear my dogs in the background. I was thinking about pausing, but that didn't quite work. Also, the use of figurative language helps to establish pathos. And there are a few that are more impactful than other types of figurative language. And there's lots of figurative language that we won't go into. But if this is something that is really interesting to you, hopefully you are signing up for AP Lang. That's my little pitch right now. And you can go into this quite a bit. But we are just going to talk about the use of imagery, right? So a quick reminder, imagery is vivid details and imageries. It applies to the senses. You can see it, smell it, taste it, touch it, hear it. And so imagery helps to invoke an emotional response. For instance, vivid descriptions of injuries in a battlefield, or the living conditions of sex-trafficked youth, or the effects of pollution can invoke like horror and shock and sympathy in an audience. I talk about going to the beach and coming across all of this pollution and these suffering animals and those sorts of things, and give you lots of detail about what it looks like and sounds like and smells like, those sorts of things. Again, vivid descriptions of happy children playing and feeling carefree can invoke feelings of joy and hope. Right, so the way that things are described is an attempt to evoke an emotional response and to help you care. A second strategy is the use of similes and metaphors. So similes and metaphors both compare unlike things. Similes use like or as, metaphors do not. You gotta be quiet. Metaphors do not. I have some examples here for you. A presidential one, President Ronald Reagan in 1985 says, "There are many mountains yet to climb. We will not rest until every American enjoys the fullness of freedom, dignity, and opportunity as our birthright." He's not actually talking about mountains. He is trying to inspire people to kind of keep going. Even though there's a long way to go, we can kind of work tirelessly. And so many mountains, there is the metaphor. The second one, Mother Teresa, "Love is a fruit in season at all times and in reach of every hand." For you guys, I'm not exactly sure where I was, but I jumped off so that I could yell at my dogs and lock them out of the room. I think we were talking about Mother Teresa. Her metaphor, "Love is a fruit in season at all times and in the reach of every hand." She's comparing love to a fruit here in order to kind of inspire people to be more generous with their love and to remind them that it is readily available. And then finally, this is something that's seen kind of a lot, this idea that American values are under attack. So that's using the metaphor of war to kind of describe opposition to more contemporary or traditional values. So that's similes and metaphors. Finally, repetition and rhyme. So rhyming words or repeating words, phrases, or grammatical structures creates a tempo or a rhythm that can really invoke or evoke emotion in the audience, can help you feel inspired or afraid or angry, just the repetition of different sounds or different words. One of the most common examples of using repetition is Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. He repeats that phrase, "I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream," which is very inspirational to use that as a structure in his persuasive speaking there. Okay, you guys, so that is really all I am introducing for pathos. So let's take a second and review. Pathos is the appeal to emotion in order to persuade an audience, right? It can appeal to positive or negative emotions. Some of the strategies that we talked about in this presentation are the use of anecdotes, so personal stories, the use of emotionally charged language, how we call and name things, war, destruction, um, peace, those sorts of things are words that just carry a lot of emotion and are used pretty often. In today's politics, we hear things about equality and equity and justice and prejudice. Those are all terms that kind of come up pretty regularly in our political and social arena. And so I want you to kind of pay attention when those sorts of things appear as we are practicing this week. And then finally, figurative language, use of imagery, similes, and metaphors, rhyme, and repetition to create kind of a tempo or a rhythm in a speech or an argument that helps to evoke some sort of emotion in the audience, too. I don't have a slide about this next idea, but I do think that it's important that we talk about it. Like always, you guys, the kind of emotion that the speaker tries to evoke is dependent on who their intended audience is, right? You can really use this need for belonging or this desire to be attractive or accepted with groups like teenagers. That's an appeal or an emotional appeal that works really well in that particular group. This need to protect your loved ones or your children or your pets, that works really well with a slightly older group. This idea of fun and excitement is really persuasive for young kids again. Right? So think about the kind of emotion that works well to connect a particular audience to a particular message. Because just like the way we use logical reasoning, it's not a one size fits all kind of approach. Who you're trying to persuade will dictate kind of the feelings that you should really help to evoke. So that is really all I have for this introduction to pathos. After you are finished watching this, you should watch the video. It has some examples about pathos in commercials and advertisements. So it'll give you some more examples. This focused more on examples for how pathos is used in writing because I want to prepare you for the editorials that you are reading this week. Like always, if you have any questions, you can shoot me an email. Make sure that you have watched this before you attend Zoom. And these are the kinds of strategies and structures that you are looking for when annotating your articles this week. So use of anecdotes, personal stories, the use of emotionally charged language, and the use of figurative language, either imagery, similes, and metaphors, rhyme, or repetition to see what kind of emotional response the speaker is trying to evoke in the audience this week.